Welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast. In these sessions, we meet the most amazing and interesting people. We learn about their passions, their business models, cool new technologies, and of course, their lessons on personal growth. I hope you enjoy. In this Boardroom Sessions podcast, we meet Dan Conner, former Marine One helicopter pilot to both Presidents Obama and Bush. He was not only a helicopter pilot there, but worked through the Marine Corps up the ranks to that premier position. We discuss that journey of Dan's, as well as Dan's new endeavor in the drone business, in the drone market. We talk about autonomous aerial vehicles and the business applications, both public and private. He's currently with a company called Ram's Head Consulting, and we discuss that business model as well. Super fascinating and very excited to share this one with you. Dan Conner, welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a long time.
So Dan, it has been a long time. You and I met in college. We're both Sigma Chi's from Cal Poly Pomona, and we met was over 30 years ago now, I guess.
Just about, yeah.
And so that makes us very old. For one, but for two, I'm glad to rekindle here and get a chance to catch up. And welcome to the podcast here. So for the listeners. You've got a really cool story here to tell, and I think everybody's going to be super excited. You've flown a couple of presidents around as the pilot of Marine One.
Correct. So after Cal Poly Pomona, I joined the Marine Corps and flew helicopters. Was stationed out of San Diego, did a few deployments around the world, and after a while, you get enough experience, then you're capable of applying for or being asked to apply to HMX-1, which is the squadron that flies the president and takes care of a lot of the dignitaries in Washington, D.C.
That's awesome. So we'll talk about that here in a second, and then right now you're working with a company called Ram's Head. Right?
Ram's Head Solutions.
Ram's Head Solutions, and you're in the drone business.
Correct.
Right?
It's service industry.
Service industry for drones, right? And so you have a couple of different use cases that you're working on there, both in private and in public sector.
Correct.
And that's super fascinating to the folks here, I'm certain, and we're going to dive into some of that as well. But why don't you take us back through the Marine One experience, like how the Marine Corps. So you got into Officers Candidate School through college, and then you went into the Marine Corps. Did you know you wanted to be a pilot right away?
I did. In fact, my whole family had been in naval aviation, both Navy and Marine Corps, going back to World War II. So I always knew I wanted to be in naval aviation, either the Navy or the Marine Corps, and ended up being much more aligned with what the Marine Corps was about. I had a great time.
Okay, awesome. So walk us through that journey in a nutshell.
Sure. So you go to officer candidate school, and then you go to a thing called the basic school, which is just how to be the basics of how to be a Marine officer. Really some good life experiences and life, learning about the basics of leadership and tactics. And then from there you go to flight school. And you go down that pipeline and select jets, propellers, or helicopters, and I selected helicopters.
What was the decision-making process there?
Well, I really loved being closer to the ground, and jets are way up high, and propellers are the C-130s. They don't have as much interaction with the Marine Corps on a daily basis in terms of working with grunts.
So you thought you were going to shoot stuff. You thought you were going to be close air support, as they call it, right?
Yeah. So, and in fact, one of the jobs I did have was as a forward air controller, which is that pilot on the ground stationed with the infantry that gets to talk to the pilots in the air and tell them where to drop the bombs. So that was a blast.
And about what time was this? What were we doing in the world at that time?
Oh boy, that was in 2002 and 2003. In fact, we were in Okinawa, where we were hoping to get called up and with the push into Iraq, but ended up not happening. So we ended up valiantly guarding the shores of Okinawa.
Okay. And safe to say, nothing happened to Okinawa during that period.
We think I'd like to take a small bit of credit for that.
Awesome. So then how did that progress? How did the career in helicopters progress?
Sure. Then I went back to flying helicopters, and in fact did make it. I was in Iraq when a buddy of mine who was now at the squadron, the Marine One, said, "Hey, you ever think about applying for this squadron?" And I said, "I don't know that I'd be qualified yet. I didn't think I had the hours." And we started doing the math, and she's like, "No, you've actually got the qualifications, you will by the time you're done with this deployment." So I applied for it, and it's a bit of a selection process. Where
I can imagine.
Yeah,
it's only a couple of pilots that fly Marine One, right?
It's actually a large organization, much larger than you'd think. There's about 70 guys at any one time, so about 15 guys per year. It's a 4-year tour, and you put in an application, and the ready room throws darts at it and says yes or no, and it's a bit of a good old boys club, but that's just fine because I always say that after you fly helicopters for a while, you've got that down, but the real key to success in any organization like that is, can I put up with this guy for a week at a time in a hotel room?
Okay.
And are you going to make the ready room a better place for with your existence?
You wouldn't think that. You would think that there'd be other criteria there,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, that's what it is. So for the listeners at home here, it's the big black helicopter with the white paint on the bottom that flies the president to and from the White House lawn, right?
Well, it's green on the bottom and white on top. In fact, they're called white tops. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we fly to and from Andrews Air Force Base. That's the primary route that you'll see us flying. But wherever the president goes, we will always have an aircraft present for him if he needs or wants it.
Okay.
So generally, if he's on the road on a whistle-stop tour, going from the South Lawn to, we'll say, Lexington, Kentucky, to Cincinnati, Ohio, to someplace in Cleveland, and then back to the White House, either in a stumping for other congressional seats, or his own presidential campaign every 4th year. We'll have an aircraft at each one of those stops. He won't always be flying it. Maybe one of those stops he will, but he'll go from the South Lawn to Andrews Air Force Base to each of those places, and then he'll come back later on that night and go from Andrews Air Force Base to the South Lawn. So that's a good number of crews you'll need to do that.
Okay.
3 stops, that's really 5 different crews, because it's long enough away from home that you need to think about crew rest from an aviator's perspective.
Yeah,
so you have 2 guys.
Yeah, I think about one getting him to and from the Air Force One, right?
Exactly.
And then one when he lands.
There is only one Air Force One aircraft commander, because it's such a, he's always, there's only one of him.
Okay. And so the selection process, you went through it and you ultimately were there. Was it a first try success?
Yeah. I always tell the folks that came in after me, like, if you want to go to Marine One, you should probably wait to be asked. You can put in an application, but every year when we have this selection process, and it's an ongoing event, the commanding officer will sit down and say, "Hey, we need good guys in the squadron. Go reach out to your friends in the fleet." And so each of those guys that are already in the squadron reaches out, and so we've got a good network going, and it's a pretty fascinating job, both professionally and as well as the experiences you get outside of the regular Marine Corps to what you're thrown into is just it's amazing. So you're asked to apply. I've known a few guys that'll put in an application and they'll be fine because they just didn't get reached out to. But and then everyone writes good things on in your application on in the ready room, and they have a final selection panel, and you're voted up or down.
Okay. And then you get into the role, and what specific training is there for flying dignitaries and presidents?
It's changed since I've been there a little bit because they have the V-22 Osprey, but on the white side we call it, which is the presidential aircraft. There's two. There's the H-60, which you don't see too much, but it's out there, and then the H-3, which is that traditional aircraft that you see the president walking up the stairs and. So you'll go through a pretty intense systems class where you'll learn all about how the aircraft works and what makes it function, and you'll get to know a lot more about aviation. You really do hone your kind of professional skills, not just as a pilot of an aircraft, but as an aviator and understanding the entire system. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty fun to do that. And then you go... You fly the aircraft, and then there's a pretty specific mission requirement that you learn how to, you can imagine it doesn't just happen, and it's not like picking up a bunch of grunts from the field. It's a very specific use case scenario for a helicopter, so you need to know how to,
I'd imagine there's a lot that you can't talk about.
There's a fair amount, but all that stuff is boring. All the stuff that you can talk about is the most enjoyable stuff.
Well, good. So what are some of the highlights? You flew George W.
I was there from 2005 to 2009. So I was with President Bush, and then the first few months of the Obama administration.
Okay.
And that's purely coincidental. There's there's 15 new guys that come in each year. So there's nothing about it that is dedicated to any individual president.
Just a term that you're there, and just to coincides with whoever happens to be in the Oval Office at
Exactly.
that time. Awesome. And so what are some of the highlights? What's some of the fun parts of the job, and what are some of the not so fun parts of the job?
Sure. I think the fun parts of the job, the most enjoyable, are a couple things. You get to hang out with people in a ready room that are just top of their game. And like I was saying, one of the criteria is, can I hang out with this person in a hotel room for a week at a time? Socially, you need to have the ability to interact with others. It's just a nature of the business. So it's a really enjoyable place to be, professionally and socially. You hang out together. It's a very tight-knit group of people. But then when you go on the road, you're also hanging out with folks from usually junior staffers from the White House and other agencies. Those people are also top of their game. People that you can just look at them and say, you know what, that guy's going to be a U.S. attorney someday, or that guy's going to run for Congress and he's going to do amazing things. It's an impressive atmosphere that you're immersed into. Very
professional, I would imagine. Very protocol centric.
Very much so. Yeah. The professionalism is, they expect a lot out of you, and 99.9% of the time people live up. Occasionally, they don't, and then they find themselves leaving not just that squadron, but any organization that supports the president. You need to have the top guys in those jobs.
And are you flying foreign dignitaries around as well?
We are, on occasion. We'll fly, I remember flying Maliki, the Prime Minister of Iraq, I believe at the time, and a few other folks. I did a trip to Germany for Angela Merkel's a visit to her hometown. I didn't fly him, but a few of my friends got to fly the Pope.
Okay.
When he was making a tour a few years ago, probably 10 years ago so.
All right.
Yeah.
And so when those dignitaries are traveling with the president, do they travel together at occasion?
On occasion, but not. However, the protocol works, and however they want to work together. I remember we did a flight with President Bush to George Washington's home just down in Virginia, and it was a dual appearance. The president and the prime minister, the president of France, had just spoken on the South Lawn together, or had met, and then they were going to have a joint appearance down in
George Washington's old front lawn.
Exactly.
Which is impressive, by the way. If no one's been there and taken the tour, it's a pretty amazing house. I can see why he built it back in the day.
Absolutely, it's gorgeous, and to be able to land a helicopter there, that's probably the second coolest place to land outside of the South Lawn.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. But the president of France decided to drive, and the president of the United States, we flew him.
Okay. That's great. So what an accolade! What a cool thing to be have done in your life, and then life hits and your tour of duty in the Marine Corps ended. I mean, how'd that happen? Was it just you timed out?
It's a 4-year tour, and you do your time, and then you really go back to just being a regular guy in a squadron again.
Mm-hmm.
You've become quite seasoned after that. So you're usually in the division officer ranks, or some guys even get selected for command right then and there out of HMX, and they go on and continue on. For me, I went back to I was the operations officer for a deploying squadron. We went off to the Gulf. And then when we came back from that 9-month deployment, afterwards we actually changed to a V-22 squadron, and I didn't want to fly V-22, so I
the
decided.
V-22, for those who don't know, is the Osprey, and which is a fixed wing aircraft that has a tilting wing, which the engines, the rotary, is it you call them rotary?
Yeah, the rotors become propellers.
Right? So it flips up and becomes a vertical takeoff aircraft, and then eventually the rotors turn and then it makes forward progress.
Exactly. So theoretically it should have a lot more efficiencies than a regular old helicopter, and in fact it does, but it doesn't quite have the same efficiencies of a fixed wing. It's still a fairly expensive and inefficient prospect.
Right. And so that leads us, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those inefficiencies here in the business model. But so you ended up leaving the Marine Corps, and then what?
Yeah, so when I decided to not fly aircraft anymore, I became the Naval Attaché to Pakistan, which is a fascinating story in and of itself. But then suffice to say that I was ready to transition out of the Marine Corps, and I retired in 2014. Came out to Los Angeles and started working with a friend of mine up in LA. But quickly decided, I really like aviation. Wanted to get back into it or stay in it. And I like startups. And drones had always, you can see that drones are absolutely the future of aviation. I think, frankly, we've seen probably the last manufactured fighter jet aircraft with the technology that we're seeing now. I don't think we'll need to have pilots in some of these aircraft.
Oh yeah, we just had the Huntington Beach Air Show where for 3 days Team America was on display. Yep. And we had an opportunity to see the F-35 strike fighter, the latest generation strike fighter, which any aircraft fan will know is to hold back. It has a computer designed to not go to its full capability because it will make the pilot pass out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it has to fly at limited capabilities beyond its capabilities so that it can keep the pilot in check. So
the
weakest
pilot
link is the pilot
himself.
Without a doubt. So if you removed the pilot from that plane, it could do far more.
It absolutely could. And so you just need to get the technology to the point where it is capable of understanding the situation around it and making decisions that are the right ones each and every time.
Right, which hence is a business model, right? And so on the Boardroom Sessions podcast, we are always going to break down some cool business model here. And today we're going to talk about the private and the public sector use of drones, right? And so tell us about Ramshead.
So Ramshead Solutions is a service provider for drones. We have teams of operators using a COCO model. It's called the contractor-owned, contractor-operated. There's also government-owned, contractor-operated that we can fall in on the government's equipment. But I'll send guys out to the field, and they will operate drones and essentially provide ISR as a service.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody on the podcast is familiar with drones. Their kids have them. Their neighbors are flying them. They've witnessed countless shows on TV that they're watching right now are being filmed on a drone. So what are some of the private sector business models that are good? You and I discussed briefly that the real estate inside someone's house is a business model, but it's not one that Ramshead wants to focus on for various reasons. Tell us about that.
Sure. So the most common applications you see nowadays are with real estate developers and taking pictures. And while that's all well and good, generally you see that it's a real estate agent's 16-year-old son who has taken the picture and provided for his
Low
father.
cost barrier to entry, right?
And
Sharper image camera with a GoPro on the bottom.
And I'm just not a big fan of competing with a 16-year-old for market share.
Yeah.
So it's a legitimate use of drones. But then there's also some other little more sophisticated models that are out there. We were talking about movie production, and that's another one that I don't do, but that's more of a cinematographer, which is an art form in and of itself, learning to operate an aircraft rather than aircraft operator learning how to shoot movies. But what we do is linear inspections, power lines, gas lines, and the like, public utility
so large
companies.
surveys of infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can use other super cool technologies like infrared and 3D mapping and things like that, right?
Absolutely. And another, if we're doing agricultural inspections, RGB cameras, which differentiate between red, green, and blue,
Okay.
and that will actually tell you the health of a crop then and there. So you can actually make pretty radical changes in any one crop cycle while it's being planted, rather than just wait till the next cycle and say, well, this portion of the field needs more nitrogen or water or whatever the thing may be.
Oh, that's real-time almanac stuff, right?
It
So
absolutely is. It's fascinating.
Put some water here, put some fertilizer there, change a crop dynamic.
And I'm not a farmer, but I do realize that there's some science to it, and we can provide that science to the farmer so he can make more informed decisions real time.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And so what are the where do you see the business heading in this private sector that we're talking about?
In the private sector, we've got a few headwinds that will eventually be cleared, and we'll be doing just fine. But for right now, the FAA, which owns the national airspace, has some pretty significant restrictions on what you can and cannot do commercially with unmanned aircraft. As well they should, because that same airspace is also occupied by manned aircraft.
Sure.
And being a pilot, I'd prefer not to run into a drone.
Yeah, as well as I'm sure there's some homeowner and other issues. You know, people don't want to have drones flying all over in front of their house, and
absolutely
privacy issues for some folks.
And those need to absolutely be addressed. Part of it is standardizing the industry to make sure that we're doing things right. Another part of it is to provide public relations to make sure the public knows that we are not there to be peeping toms. And so, you know, I deal occasionally with first responders, police and fire, and that Fourth Amendment search and seizure issue is a real one for the police, as well as it should be. So you try your darndest to create a sense of trust with the public to make sure that they realize that if there's an aircraft flying overhead, it's there for a legitimate public purpose, not for something nefarious.
Yep. And so you see some of those rules changing. How so?
Well, right now we have to maintain visual line of sight of an aircraft. So it makes it a very difficult proposition to do any kind of linear inspections and send an aircraft out on its own.
So if you were looking for a long power line or something like that, it would be difficult to go survey that right now, right?
Correct.
Because you have to see the
aircraft. We're making progress in that, and the term is beyond visual line of sight, and there are waivers for that you can apply for. It's very limited right now, and imagine in the future we'll have Amazon or whomever supplying packages via drone service. There's going to be an awful lot of things that change between now and the full integration of the drones into the national airspace system and into our daily lives. But I think it'll happen eventually.
And what are you doing right now to business development? Like, where are you looking for these applications?
Right now, there's a couple places. The U.S. government is, since if you're operating with the U.S. government, you don't have with the military, you don't have those same restrictions. Certainly overseas, and on bases and stations to help them train. But there's an awful lot of other countries out there that are actually much further advanced than are we. The technology is mostly there, but it's that integration of the technology with what is already in existence, and that's where the trouble lies. So other nations are a little bit further ahead than we are, but that's because they don't have the same kind of considerations. Because once the FAA says something, then the entire global airspace system will
Okay.
adapt to it.
Okay.
So they want to make
Is
sure
it because
that it's
it's
the right
just
answer.
not as crowded in some of those other countries as far as the airspace, or is it because certain applications can take precedent? What's the difference?
Well, I think it's not as crowded. Take something like El Salvador. There's the regulatory environment is just not nearly as robust as it is here in the States. But it's so you can do a heck of a lot there in terms of flying aircraft beyond visual line of sight. Australia is another good example. They've got their west coast and their east coast, but there's absolutely nothing in that great outback in
Sure.
between. So there's an awful lot of space you can
Operate.
in and learn, frankly.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so you see some regulation getting freed up and some business happening here. Do you see that there's a large market of applications that are just waiting for the FAA? Is there some lobbying going on right now?
Oh, there's tremendous amounts of lobbying. I've been part of that. The applications are tremendous. Everything from the small man portable type of unmanned aircraft that can maybe stay aloft for maybe an hour or so, depending on battery life, all the way up to the urban traffic marketplace that's trying to gather speed and strength. But we'll see how that goes. I think the notion of a flying taxi is interesting, but we'll have to take a crawl, walk, run approach, and those smaller ISR.
So that's a big paradigm shift we just jumped from. In my mind, when we're talking about drones, I'm thinking about unmanned air vehicles, right? UAVs.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're just brought me into a visual of actually people being taxied and ferried around by an autonomous flying vehicle.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It's something that we don't really think of in our daily lives. But I guarantee that the technology will advance. Whether the society will advance and want it to happen is a different story.
Sure. So what about packages? The next logical step is, we've all seen the commercial where is it a good idea or not a good idea to have Amazon dropping packages on your front lawn via a drone?
Mm-hmm.
And so do you think that that's something that's being talked about in your circles?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And it's something that will happen. I don't know that it's going to be the game changer that everyone thinks it will be. That it's that last mile of logistics delivery that is the current exciting topic. They've just done that in real time. They delivered, I think, a toothbrush or something like that to somebody in Southwest Virginia.
Okay.
But the amount of work that went into making that toothbrush delivery was, I don't think it was worth.
Wasn't cost effective.
They'll probably have to expand.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
Kind of light bulb analogy, right? First light bulb costs a lot more than it sold for. But,
Precisely.
but you'll get to a scale at some point. So.
Yeah.
The more and more packages I get delivered to my house, the more and more I think about the business model that's going to have to solve that problem. Right now, there's not enough. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for our traffic patterns. It's not good for a lot of things to have that many parcel trucks delivering things on the road today.
Precisely. So we'll see. I'm hopeful because some of the other companies I work with are really expecting that that's the wave of the future, and it could very well be. But again, we have to crawl, walk, run. Let's start with this ISR stuff and taking pictures, both for the military, but also linear inspections, agriculture, and providing information. The next step after that, we've got the capabilities is provide actual physical goods.
Good. And so you're in the middle of it right now, and you're working to help build your business to be able to support these ISR, you're calling it.
Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance.
Okay. And so you're being able to gather that information using 3D imaging, using infrared, using other sources to find that information for these private sector, applications, right?
Absolutely. And one of the big topics, we hear it all the time, data is the new oil. These sensors can, which is why we have to be very cognizant of what we do collect. But these sensors can collect a tremendous amount of data that would be useful to lots of different folks. And in my role as the naval attaché, I got to be a bit of I had some interaction with the intelligence community, so I got to understand that aspect of it a lot. I'm always very cautious about who I recommend as far as what drone companies I'd like to have people work with. I recommend not working with Chinese companies because they tend to collect all the data that I'd rather not be a part of having them share.
And there's some ethics that are involved in that, right? I mean, there's not only those for the state secrets and state information, military reasons, but there's also all kinds of other myriad of privacy issues to worry about.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, I've talked to police and fire stations across certainly the Southland here, and they, one of the common things I hear is, well, if they want to, take the information from my crime scene, then they're welcome to it. Like, well, what happens if your crime scene is next to one of the large energy centers, a distribution point?
And so you're referring to like a camera crew for a news agency doing a flyover of a crime scene?
No. So what police will do frequently is map out a crime scene nowadays using a drone.
Okay.
And some of that mapping software, and the most common drone to do that is DJI, which is a Chinese company.
Okay.
So they are happy to say, hey, if they want to look at my crime scene, they're welcome to.
Okay.
And 99.9% of the time, there is nothing sensitive about it. But having collected in a former life, I can tell you that there's all sorts of information.
It's the adjacent areas that
Exactly.
are also, right? And so you're saying that you're enabling a foreign power or a foreign company to have the ability to do all kinds of things that they may not have the same ethics and concerns around privacy that we do.
Sure, and I think there is going to have to be a real discussion about what is private and what is public in the not too. And it's happening right now. It's a fascinating discussion. Where I parked my car, is that private? Well, I don't really. It's not something I advertise, but it's right out front. Somebody, if they flew a drone over, could figure that kind of stuff out. So it's a matter of what it's a comfort level in a lot of ways that we're going to have to grow accustomed to.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely becoming the norm. There are more and more drones, whether people hear them or not. They're there. Used to be the satellites that people were concerned with, right? But now that other people can have a drone, it changes the game completely.
Absolutely, and there are absolutely people out there using them for nefarious purposes. So how do we mitigate that, and how do we minimize that risk going forward? And if we're going to do this as a profession, how do we make that profession? How do we instill standards? Because one of the reasons I got into unmanned aircraft is because I saw a significant lack of aviation professionalism in the community.
It sounds like there's a huge opportunity to clean that up.
Absolutely, yeah, because a lot of it are the remote control pilot types that just want to fly and take pictures. Well, that's fine, but you're operating right here in John Wayne Airport airspace, and you're kind of in the way.
Yeah,
we'd prefer that not happen.
Yeah, of course, for all the public safety, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, where do you see the actual vehicles themselves changing in the private sector? I know we've had conversations around the military use, right? And one of I've been privy to some folks here in Southern California that build and make UAVs for the military, and I've seen how awesome those are and sophisticated, and That's typical military machine, right? We have very deep pockets when it comes to building weapons. But when it comes to the private vehicles for carrying parcels and things, where do you see the market going?
Well, you're absolutely right. Those I think the technology development on the military side is going to have to transition over into the private sector and frankly come down in cost a significant amount, which it will. I'm confident this will happen. Because manufacturing some of these drones, they've got it down now. They know how to make it. The processes of putting a wing together or a body of an aircraft, and so and a good portion of the cost of any drone is the sensor package. Mm-hmm. So we don't. The police and fire don't need to have a laser designator on their drone to tell them with a 10-digit grid where a particular person is. We can do a GoPro camera, which is a lot less expensive, and those sensors are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. So I think we can get the price down to make it a reasonable offering to both those linear inspections and infrastructure inspection things. Agriculture, if you can essentially increase somebody's crop yield enough to make it worth their while, then they're going to do it. And then police and fire, if you can provide those sensors that give them all the information they need, then that's where the market is.
Right.
Because there's hundreds of thousands of those kind of people. There's thousands of military applications.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a numbers game.
What an exciting time. So Ram's Head Solutions is the company.
Yep, exactly.
And I'll leave a link on the Boardroom Sessions podcast link here for Ram's Head so that people can go check it out. And I'm excited for the whole drone world. I think that with some regulation, I'm one of those that thinks that there needs to be some regulation.
Without a doubt.
I fly, and I don't want to be a statistic on a plane that dropped because some kook was flying his drone to do something. Mm-hmm. So I definitely want to make sure that's there. And I also have a level of privacy concerns that are around here that have been voiced. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that maps out. And I'm super glad we got to connect again, Dan. It's been a long time coming. And thanks for sharing your story about the Marine One. What an exciting experience.
Oh, it was a blast, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Hey, Mike here. Hope you liked this boardroom session. Please check back to our future sessions as we're recording a new one every month. If you want to reach out, look for me on LinkedIn or send me a note at mike@sidepath.com. That's Mike at sidepath.com.